It's Tuesday, March 11th, 2025. It's the 70th day of the year, and we've got some big-time updates for you on our upcoming coast-to-coast major storm. This one looks like it's going to be the strongest one of March, maybe of the year so far, so we've got a lot to cover. First, before we move on to the forecast, look at these swirly guys out here. We've got one off the west coast, we've got one off the east coast here. A really cool-looking presentation on satellite. This little thing right here was actually responsible for producing a tornado yesterday in Florida, right around Orlando, caused EF2 damage, actually pretty intense tornado, and it happened while I was filming this video. This next one over here is going to have the ability to produce some tornadoes of its own, and let's talk about that right now. Let's start this video off talking about the synoptic pattern, because the weather starts up top, and we really don't know what's going to happen down on the surface until we get closer, so let's look from the top down. This is that spinning system that we were just looking at on satellite that's going to come in to the southwestern United States, cause some gusty winds in the higher elevations, bring about some moisture into Mexico, but it'll be mostly dried out by the time it gets to Texas. And its main purpose here, once it gets into the central United States, is going to be to sweep the Gulf of the dew points that are rising right now. So one of the big saving graces that we have right now is this storm system. If this didn't come through, then the Gulf would just sit there and bake in the sun, and instability would rise. And when our next bigger system came through, it would have a lot more moisture and instability to pull from, and we'd have a bigger tornado outbreak. But this little guy right here is going to produce its own severe weather in Oklahoma and Texas Wednesday evening, and we'll talk about that right here in a second. But for the most part, it's just going to sweep some of the unstable air out of the Gulf ahead of our next major storm, and you can see it very clearly here as we go into Thursday. We've got a huge trough over here in the west leading to a pretty large ridge over here in the central U.S. This is going to allow for very warm air to build up very quickly out in front of the storm. So even though we had this little cleaner storm go through, it's still going to get very moist and very unstable, especially the farther south we go. And as this trough comes over the Rockies, it's going to bring in some much cooler air aloft with it, and that's going to clash with that warm air, and we're going to have ourselves a major storm system. Now, this is also going to bring about some heavy rain and some very heavy snow totals in the higher elevations over here on the west coast as well. And it's going to bring about some very strong wind gusts in the higher elevations of the southern Rockies. But the truly dangerous part of this storm doesn't materialize until it crosses the Rockies and starts becoming a deepening low pressure system in the plains. It's going to be potentially a record-breaking low pressure system, at least up there in the top 10 somewhere of mid-latitude cyclones for March. And look at this, over 100-mile-per-hour winds here on the southeast side of that jet streak, negatively tilted storm here. Everything is coming together for a very efficient transport of moisture from the Gulf and cold air from Canada to mix here and cause a huge storm. This is going to cause destructive severe weather, a multi-day severe weather event from the deep south through the Ohio Valley, maybe even over into the east coast. This is going to cause a very serious wildfire event in Texas and Oklahoma, and this will cause a blizzard in the northern plains up into Manitoba. Everything is going to happen all at once pretty much during this classic springtime storm. Friday is when that low pressure center is going to be the deepest, but watch what happens as we go into Saturday. Saturday looks really interesting too, as the overall trough becomes much bigger, much more robust, and it descends farther to the south, still staying negatively tilted, picking up plenty of Gulf moisture, transporting it all the way up into Canada. This is going to continue the severe weather threat into Saturday and Sunday, which actually I think Saturday might be our biggest day. And then of course on Sunday we've got to worry about the east coast, and then we've got our big ridge coming through, and we'll do it all over again next week. But let's focus on the short term for right now. So our little cleaner system that's going to come through and thankfully sweep some of the moisture out of the Gulf is going to lead to some severe weather on Wednesday evening. This is going to happen in southeast Oklahoma, northeast Texas, and western portions of Arkansas. This mostly looks like a hail threat, but as you can see, around 5 p.m. or so, we are going to have supercells starting to pop up around Dallas all the way down towards Austin. These will be mostly elevated and will once again cause some downpours and some hail. The tornado threat's pretty low, but we can't rule it out, especially the closer the storms get over there towards extreme southeastern Oklahoma. That's where I think we have the best chance of maybe some sort of surface-based storms that could produce tornadoes. But for the most part, this is just going to be an appetizer round for our upcoming major major multi-day severe weather outbreak, which really starts on Friday, March 14th, where we have a day 4 enhanced risk of severe weather from about Peoria, Illinois, down past St. Louis, down past western Kentucky, past Memphis, all the way into the mid-Mississippi River Valley, near the Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana border. Slight risk goes all the way up plumb near Minneapolis and all the way down to the Gulf Coast. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Our major limiting factor, the only thing holding this storm back on Friday, is the fact that we're not going to have a lot of moisture. Our sweeper storm, our little cleaner storm, is going to knock some of the dew points down on Wednesday and Thursday. So when Friday comes around and this big cold front and dry line comes into play, there's going to be a very strong burst of wind coming over the Rockies, potentially over hurricane force winds coming across Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma, just forcing itself onto these very warm temperatures out in front of it. But the dew points aren't going to be quite as high as maybe they would be otherwise. For example, one storm that this reminds me of synoptically is March 31st of 2023. If you guys remember that, that was one of the biggest tornado outbreaks in our nation's history. And this storm looks exactly like that, except the moisture isn't quite as robust this time around. We had 60, 65 degree dew points all the way up here in Iowa for that storm. With this one, those are barely making it to the northern side of Arkansas. So that might be our saving grace, but there also could be just enough moisture to actually make it far enough north to spawn some storms. And there's going to be enough wind shear up here in the northern mode to produce tornadoes if there's any storms that get going. And then the farther south we go, the more confident I am that we will likely have a pretty significant severe weather situation in the form of tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds. And what's unfortunate is it looks like the vast majority of this will take place overnight. Here we are around 1 a.m. That's when the storms will likely get to around Memphis, for example, on Friday into Saturday. Speaking of Saturday, we've got a day 5, 30% risk of significant severe weather from Chattanooga all the way down to Mobile. The entire state of Alabama is included here, and yes, Atlanta, Georgia is included here as well. And the slight risk goes from Cleveland and near Pittsburgh all the way down to Lake Charles. So this is also a very expansive slight risk, and I believe that this will be our biggest day. I think that this will be our most destructive day in our upcoming multi-day severe weather outbreak. And let me explain why. So one thing that we always talk about is the 500 millibar winds. Well, let's take a look at the 850 millibar winds. This is just winds a little bit closer to the surface, not necessarily on the surface, but a couple thousand feet above our heads. These are the winds that will be going into the storm and interacting with those higher level winds to actually produce rotation. And this is what we usually look at to determine how strong wind shear will be. And notice how strong those lower level jet stream winds are going to be here on Friday night. But also notice how most of the strongest winds are going to be displaced from the most ample moisture. Remember, we're only going to have dew points that support robust supercell growth down here in the lower Mississippi River area. So even though we've got very strong wind shear up here, there might not be a lot of storms for those to work with. But watch what happens as we go into Saturday. A very strong low-level jet stream starts forming over the Gulf, which will increase the moisture transport from the Gulf over into the deep south. And this is happening early in the day, 2 p.m. We've got 50 to 60 mile per hour winds just a couple thousand feet above our heads. That's going to rapidly increase to potentially over hurricane force winds above our heads. And that's going to line up very well with the moisture that's going to be in place. Everything is coming together for Saturday to potentially be a tornado outbreak. So I want everybody to be very aware of this. Obviously, we're 5 days out. Things could change. But if the models continue to show this at this level, this is going to be a high-end event that has the potential to produce several tornadoes. And then even outside of the tornado risk, we're talking about straight line damaging winds, very large hail, your traditional big time spring severe weather outbreak. That's what we're looking at here as we go into the day on Saturday. And then yes, as we push this into the future, everything does move farther east. The tornado producing wind shear might become displaced again from the best moisture, but we're going to have a very strong squall line capable of producing strong winds, hail, and tornadoes that goes all the way across the East Coast. And that is highlighted here by a day 6 slight risk of severe weather from eastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey all the way down to the Florida Panhandle on Sunday, March 16th. And of course, we will talk more about this as time goes on. This is the farthest out forecast, so we don't know a lot of details about this yet. All right, it's not just severe weather that's going to be happening with this storm. We're also going to have snow. Most of that's going to be reserved to the Cascades and the Intermountain West. In fact, there's going to be a couple places here, potentially in California, that get over 134 inches of snow over the next 150 hours or so. That's going to be pretty intense. And then as you can see here, we do have a small area that could see 2 to 4 inches of snow on the backside of our major low pressure system that's developing in the plains. This will be a blizzard for you guys. It's going to be a pretty impactful storm for North and South Dakota, even for a lot of Minnesota, but I don't think it's going to drop a ton of snow that will be measurable. It will mostly be blowing and drifting snow that causes problems on the roadways while it's falling. Another thing that we have to be concerned about here outside of the severe weather is the general rainfall, the precipitation that's going to be happening. First of all, as all of these storms enter the country on the western side, they are going to drop significant rain, potentially over 4 to 5 inches for a broad area from Oregon all the way down into Southern California. Even the valleys could get in on some significant rainfall here, but of course, in the higher elevations, we are concerned mostly about that rainfall being a bigger deal. This could lead to landslides, mudslides, flash flooding. If you live in Northern California or southwestern Oregon, especially, be weather aware. Understand that flash flooding is going to be very likely over the next 7 days or so. And then another area to watch is going to be northern Alabama up into northwest Georgia, western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, southeast Kentucky, southwest Virginia. The Appalachian Mountains here are susceptible to flooding, and we are potentially going to see some areas receive more than 3 to 4 inches of rain over the next 7 days. So make sure you are prepared for that as well. And then once again, I want you to notice over here from New Mexico into Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, not a drop of rain is possible here over the next 7 days. Combine that with the fact that we're going to have a potentially historic low pressure system crossing over the Rockies, bringing about 90 mile per hour winds coming down the Front Range into places like northern Texas, the panhandle of Oklahoma, 50 to 60 mile per hour winds all the way up there into Kansas and Nebraska. By the way, this is the blizzard winds that we're talking about here. Put all that together and boom, you've got yourselves a huge elevated and critical fire risk, larger than Texas itself, that goes from Nebraska all the way down to Mexico. Wildfires are going to be going off like crazy here on Friday into Saturday. This is going to be a big part of this storm, and it's going to be a very dangerous part of this storm, so make sure you guys are prepared for this as well. All right, so it's going to be a busy week here. We've got a very small chance of going live on Wednesday for that slight risk in Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas. We'll probably be on standby mode for that. Thursday, it looks like we'll be able to just make a video and prepare for what's next. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it's looking pretty likely that we're going to have live streams here on the channel, with the best chance being on Saturday. All three of these have the potential of being 12-hour long live streams, so we could be live for 36 hours from Friday through Sunday here on this channel, providing severe weather coverage. So make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, and make sure you tell your friends and family about what we're doing here. If they want free weather coverage, go over to Ryan Hall, y'all. We'll be here throughout the duration of this thing until we're not needed anymore. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.